Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Data Sharing, Advanced Analytics, and Success with IoT. I'm Steve Paul, contributing editor at MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. Our thanks go out to Teradata for their sponsorship of this webinar. This event will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 or 4 business days after the end of our event. In addition, today's slides will be made available to attendees as well. We welcome your questions for our speakers today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in the questions box in the lower corner of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as time permits after our presentation. If you're having audio problems while listening via computer, please dial in via telephone instead, or check the help link in the upper right-hand corner of your console. And now on to our presentation, Data Sharing, Advanced Analytics, and Success with IoT. Discussing today's topic will be John Bukola, CIO of Wash Multifamily Laundry Systems, Stephanie Jernigan, Assistant Professor of the Practice in the Operations Management Department at Boston College, Sam Ransbotham, Associate Professor of Information Systems at Boston College and Guest Editor at MIT Sloan Management Review, and David Chiron, Executive Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review. First, we'll hear from Stephanie.
Hello and welcome everybody. It looks like we have a truly stunning number of participants, so it's clear that the Internet of Things is a topic of widespread interest. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks also to the team at Sloan Management Review who has worked to make this webinar happen. So our general plan for the next hour is to quickly give some background about the IoT study and its findings. And then we're really happy to have John Bukola from Wash Laundry join us to share details about their IoT implementations over the past few years. And then after that, we'll delve into a few key points from the research, and then we'll have some time for your questions. So as you know, the webinar format doesn't allow as much direct interaction as we'd like to have, but please submit your questions as you have them, and we'll try to incorporate as many as we can into the Q&A session at the end. So let's start with some background. At MIT Sloan Management Review, there are currently 3 big idea initiatives: sustainability, social business, and data and analytics. The Data and Analytics Initiative is in its 6th year, and that program publishes annual reports, surveys, interviews, and case studies. So along the way, it's had input from more than 10,000 executives and managers in over 100 countries. A new part of the Data and Analytics Initiative this year is a study on the Internet of Things. So this involved a survey with 1,480 respondents from over 100 countries, along with interviews with executives and thought leaders on the topic of the Internet of Things. And we're really excited about the results from this initiative, and I want to thank all those who participated in the surveys and interviews. It's clearly a topic of interest to a great many people, and we certainly appreciate Teradata's support and resources to organize the survey and the webinar. So let's look at an overview of what we found. In the first place, despite the great interest in the Internet of Things, most people do not yet have an active IoT project. So in our survey, 60% of respondents reported that they're not yet using IoT. So despite this lack of engagement with IoT, or maybe because of it, a majority of respondents believe that IoT is important to their organization's strategy. So over half see it as important to their organization's strategy today, and then almost 70% say that it will be necessary to their corporate success in the future. It's also interesting to note beliefs about when the IoT will be an important part of organizations' business strategies. 52% believe that their organizations will be able to use IoT to create business value within the next 3 years, and then that figure rises to 83% among those organizations who currently have IoT projects running. Another key finding from the survey and interviews involves relationships with other organizations. So while the Internet of Things is at least nominally about things, we found that organizations who get business value from IoT focus on forging new and deeper relationships with customers and with other organizations in their value chain, and sometimes even with competitors. And then the last point is that our survey found that one key to success with the Internet of Things is mastering multiple technical capabilities. So as you know, IoT devices generate lots of data. And so to get insights from that, organizations have to have strong abilities to manage that flood of data, analyze the data, and share the data with other organizations or customers. So just as a picture is worth 1,000 words, we believe that an example is worth 1,000 bullet points. So we're very happy today to have John Bucola from Wash Laundry to tell a little bit about that organization's foray into IoT. John will give more detail, but Wash Laundry manages communal laundry facilities in apartments and universities, to name a few. And so it is understood that when you think about the Internet of Things, laundry may not leap to mind as a key area of implementation. You may think more about high-tech applications like self-driving cars or smart thermostats. And we tend to hear a lot of examples of IoT in the popular press that involve big-name marquee tech companies. But there are far more companies that are not massive tech darlings, and the Internet of Things is going to bring significant change to them as well. So we think that Wash Laundry's experiences with the Internet of Things speak to those that will be faced by organizations everywhere. And we also love this example because even if you're not in the business of managing communal laundries, chances are that you've used one before. Even if you didn't think about IoT when you used one, Wash Laundry is a great example about how the Internet of Things has fundamentally transformed the way an organization operates in an industry that hadn't seen a lot of significant change in decades. So when you try to think about how IoT might be used in laundries, you may think that it's a handy way to check on how many washers and dryers are running. But John will explain that it's so much more. It's payment systems that allow for experiments in pricing. It's changes in their relationships with suppliers and their customers, the owners of the apartment buildings. And it's a shift in workforce from people who collect and count quarters to people with technical and analytics experience. So without further preamble, let me turn this over to John to give us more details about the Internet of Things and Wash Laundry.
Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate being here today to discuss our use case. I want to start by first talking about the company so that we all have a shared understanding of the environment, the canvas on which we have to work. First of all, from a company background perspective, we're about a 70-year-old company spread out across North America. A heavy presence in Canada and the West Coast with about 75,000 implementations spanning about 550,000 washers and dryers. So our basic business, as Stephanie shared, is we install, service, and collect washers and dryers wherever there's a shared laundry or community laundry setting. So apartments are our primary focus, but we also service universities, military bases, things like that. We've got just over 1,000 employees, and our reach spans about 7 million people who do laundry in our rooms. So a fairly good canvas on which to work for this study. If you just take a look at the payment systems, and I want to spend a little bit of time on the payment systems history so that the group has a good understanding about how we get at the data. This has been a journey just within our little niche of processing payments from a box. Think about electronic payment. The basic form of electronic payment is a credit card that stores value on a credit card, on a smart card rather. That's enabled by some kind of a box on the wall that then transfers that value to a reader that's installed on the machine. But over the course of the past decade or more, these systems have evolved to now today in the future, many of these systems are enabled via smartphone payment. So we have an interesting mix of payment modalities across coin, card, and now smartphone. And this interface between the payment system and the machine is really critical for us to glean telemetry from the machine and also to get understanding of when transactions actually occur. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and how we're pulling on that particular interface point. If you take a look at our business in terms of how many machines we have, slides are not cooperating with me fully here. Go to the next slide. There we go. If you take a look at our installed base, a large number of our machines are completely offline. So although we have 550,000 machines, most of these machines are completely offline. They never see an internet connection. They never even see somebody pulling the data off of them. But we do have a very large sample space where we do collect data. And those are generally split into machines that are fully connected and then machines that are not connected, but we actually have somebody that goes and collects data off of those machines. So this gives you a sense of how we're taking and segmenting the machine and installed base, and how we think about the data that's coming off of these machines. We spent over a decade, roughly 13 years or so, implementing enterprise systems. So ERP systems, operational systems that enable us to service, install, collect on these machines. And so we already have a very solid enterprise resource planning system along with an enterprise data warehouse that's in place, as you'd expect with kind of a middle market company. But this machine data and connecting this machine data with our enterprise data, along with some external data sources, has really created new insights for us that we're just now beginning to tap into. So we're going to talk about those. So I want to talk about the first big data project we ever did. And it really started about 7 years ago when we wanted to solve for the right price of laundry. And if you think about that, it's kind of a funny question. What is the right price for a load of laundry? And the sensitivity to that price, that extra quarter, could mean the world to a resident, and it could mean the world to a property owner, or the world to us. And so getting that right is essential. A little bit about our business model: we share our revenues with our property owners. They're partners with us, so we pay our customers. And sometimes, in some instances, the money goes back to the residents themselves, like in the case of an HOA. So it's very much a partnership, and we're always after that win-win. But we spent 7 years trying to figure out what the right price of a load of laundry should be for a given location. And we started out by surveying. We wrote the shotgun approach. How should we do this? How should we think about it? And we ultimately looked at laundromats, which are our competitors, and used that information to help us determine what the price of laundry should be. And then we actually worked with an analytics group out of Boston to help us kind of consume the data, put it with some macroeconomic factors, and help us to isolate the various dimensions that are involved in factors with pricing for laundry. And they came back and said, you know what, we're finding statistical significance with several of these factors that you've given us. There's a bunch of them that aren't significant at all, but there are roughly 7 to 11, depending on the location and depending on the cluster, that are actually sensitive to these different factors. So things that you wouldn't really think of, like gas prices and household incomes and things like that, are actually factors in terms of laundry pricing. And so we gave them our 10 years worth of data. It was all kind of cleaned in the enterprise, and they came back and said, we love your data, it's very clean, and we found something. And they gave us about 62 or so polynomial regression models that helped us determine what the right price of laundry should be, to help us solve for it. They divided our customers up into different groups and said, these are the ones that are underpriced, these are the ones that are priced properly, kind of the Goldilocks effect, and these are the ones that are overpriced. And we took those and said, wow, let's see what we can do with this. We operationalized this insight, took it back, and found out that their formulas absolutely worked. And we actually evolved those formulas since then and created thousands of these polynomial regression models that are specific to our locations. There we go. So we feel like we've got a really good handle on pricing, but our shareholders and executive team asked a simple question: what else besides price can we actually manage to potentially optimize the flow through, increase the experience in our laundry rooms? Because once you figure out your price, that's really only one of the factors that you can control. Is there anything else we can do to influence the usage of these machines in our rooms? And so we kind of put a list together and said, here's some of the things that we think about. What if we had Wi-Fi in a room? What if it were cleaner? What if it had a newer machine? What if it had a larger machine or smaller machine? What about the amenities within the room? And we put them in these kind of rough categories. So yeah, we have kind of a lot of ideas here, but then what do we do with this? So we actually said, let's look in the external environment and take a look at the research that's been done on laundry usage. And it turns out not a lot of research has been done on this subject. And if you guys are ever interested in knowing about laundry usage research, please hit me up after the webinar, because I got plenty to share on that. But it turns out that there's really not a lot of great research on this subject. And so we couldn't really go to a formula and say, if we follow this formula, we are going to optimize for usage in our rooms. But we did find some interesting insights about who does laundry, what the drivers are for people to do laundry, and kind of some of the frequencies around laundry. And that really has helped us identify what we think of as our full potential. And so we think about our business as having some level of potential in it, and we want to help it reach that potential and hopefully exceed it. But we also think about that in our rooms, in our laundry rooms, in terms of the customer locations. We have the 75,000 customer locations. What is the full potential of those customers? And it's a really simple question, but it's a really important one. And the thing that we saw that was a gap was that we didn't have the telemetry from our machines telling us the things that were happening in the room, how the machines are being utilized, and the different environmental information that was on a machine. And we looked at this data, we said, wow, there's a lot here. And imagine what could be possible if we put this data with that data with this other data. And really the light bulb went off for us and said, we need to glean this telemetry and analyze it in order for us to experiment properly. Now, one of the things I'll share with you is, if you look at this kind of big, ugly flow chart, this is what state-of-the-art looked like just a few months ago for putting electronic payments in the laundry room. It's expensive. It required a lot of capital investment. It required a lot of hardware. And so this is why we have such a large base of coin-operated machines. It's just very expensive to put an electronic payment system on a machine. And so when you think about that, you go, wow, well, a lot of coins, that sounds really analog. What are they going to do with this? We look at that now and say that's a tremendous amount of opportunity. So this is what the existing kind of old school systems look like for us. The other challenge that we have is many times these laundry rooms are just in basements. You know, it's hard to get access to them. And this connectivity struggle is actually a really common one. I've worked in several different environments where connectivity is not a given. And I think in our consumer lives, we take it for granted that, you know, we can just connect. You know, we've got a phone, we've got broadband at home, but a lot of times in these settings, especially for service businesses, connectivity is not a given, and especially not a given in our business. Because these laundry rooms are, especially in high-rise buildings, they're in basements, or they're connectivity constrained. And so this is one of the constraints that we have when we think about IoT and data. So that's the setting, right? We figured out price. We've got a pretty good base of customers to work from. We have some ideas for these things that we could do to potentially increase the utilization of our equipment, optimize the experience. Now what do you do? And so this is a really fundamental concept that we're frankly still working through today. But it involves segmentation, to take your customer base, in our case our 75,000 locations, and to segment them, and to segment them across different factors, some of which are internal, like the types of machines that we have, or types of properties that we're installed in, or the size of the property, and then also the things that may be a little bit less obvious, the demographics, the vacancy rates, there's other dimensions, socioeconomic dimensions. And when you look at the segmentation, we've actually taken this information and utilized data science to come back with some kind of a formula that says, this is what the full potential looks like for this location based on these factors. And there are constraints and there are opportunities, right? But this segmentation helps us cut down our customer base into sizable chunks to allow us to test these different concepts for optimizing the experience. And so as an example, if you come up with an idea for something that we'd like to try, let's take the Wi-Fi example. Hey, what happens if we put Wi-Fi in our rooms? Well, where would you do that? We have 75,000 properties. Pick one. Which one would you do? And I like to say that they're all little snowflakes, right? They all have different attributes about them that make them a little bit different. So this segmentation really helps guide us in terms of where we try different things. So after we kind of had these concepts, we came up with this idea of an experimentation platform that would merge all these different data sources and it would be sensitive to the segmentation. And this experimentation platform would merge multiple data sources into one manageable, simple to access dashboard. And so today we have this, it sits on top of Power BI, and it pulls in external data. It pulls in, and that's things like census data or things like apartment level data. industry databases that we can pull from. We correlate that information to our enterprise data. And since we have really clean enterprise data, we can actually take and look at things by like geocodes or things like property addresses, things like that. And then we take that information and then correlate that to the machine telemetry that we have. And so when we want to execute an experiment, we come up with an idea, and then we run it through this experimentation platform to help guide us in the results, so that it's not just an instinct, but there's actual facts behind it. And this is a real-time kind of a dashboard as data streams into it. So we're a service company, right? We're not scientists, but we have to think about and change the way that we think about going to market with these different experiments. And so there isn't a week that goes by that I don't hear a new great idea. But I've trained my own thinking to change how I talk about those ideas by framing it kind of with a scientific method. So what is the hypothesis? So let's take the Wi-Fi example. I have a hypothesis. I want to put Wi-Fi in our rooms. Okay. What do you think is going to happen? I think people are going to sit there longer and do more laundry. Okay. Where do you want to try that? Well, I guess it would be in areas where we don't have existing Wi-Fi. Okay. So what kind of a population does that look like? And so now you take and guide and say, here's this idea, here's where we want to test it, and then we actually go through an implementation process. So the logistics of that experiment, and then actually running an analysis against it. So I'm going to get into some real-world examples of the things that we're testing today and actually show you a couple. But this concept of the segmentation of our locations and then how we think about experimenting on those locations is really, really critical for us. No matter what the idea is, it has to fit into this kind of framework. And so it's incredible how when you actually sit down with this kind of data in front of you and you say, I want to try this idea, how quickly it really narrows down the opportunity. And so take that Wi-Fi example. It actually showed you the properties where that would be a good use case. You'd say, you know what, it's not worth it. You stack up the costs and you stack up how much margin uplift we actually get from it, it doesn't really pencil. And so this helps us quickly iterate to determine which concepts make sense for which segments of our business. And one of the things that we use to guide us is A/B testing. And A/B testing is used very, very commonly in the virtual world, right? Your Amazon experience and your Netflix experience is probably vastly different from mine. I can tell you that my homepage on Amazon is kind of scary sometimes, right? But they're experimenting. In fact, these different web companies try all kinds of different experiments in real time, and they do that in a way that allows them to optimize their experience and to do essentially the same things I just talked about, segmentation and running different hypotheses. Virtual companies, web scale companies, do that in much more quickly because they're virtual. They can move a banner ad around and put it in a different spot in a way that I just can't move a laundry, a washer or dryer around. But what we saw was that there's a lot of tools that are available to us to do A/B testing, to compare and contrast the results of a like and similar location with one with an experiment and one without. And so this is how we have built our experimentation platform, is to compare one location that's using an experiment versus another. So let's get into an experiment that we're running right now. So we worked with a manufacturer to determine the right fill level for a washer and a dryer. And we noticed that some of the locations that we had kind of more service calls than others. We said, you know what, I have a hypothesis that some of the residents are overstuffing their machines. And so we determined the right level to fill the machine based on manufacturer recommendation, developed these fill line stickers. We printed 500 of them, put some signage in the rooms, and scattered them throughout our install base in a few select locations. And then we were comparing those now to like and similar locations to determine whether or not this is going to have an impact on things like service calls, things like the usage of the equipment, if this actually translates into more loads of laundry or not, and if the experience is any different. And so, great idea, but I don't want to print 500,000 of these. I don't believe in the idea that strongly. So let's do 500 of them, and let's see how it goes. And we have similar experiments underway for things like pricing different options on a machine. We recently partnered with a utility in Canada to look at pricing for hot water to save energy. and we set up 6 locations with that pricing structure to see how revenue would translate and versus the actual loads of laundry. The hypothesis there is that the revenue would be essentially the same if you priced hot higher, but it also saves energy. So a lot of different ways that we can use this platform to actually just test in the real world. So it's really fun. It's actually any idea. You know, we tend not to shy away from any idea. What we tend to do is take the idea, determine whether or not it's a good one, and run through that hypothesis, logistics, experiment method to determine what the opportunity looks like. And so this is how we're going about gleaning insights from our data. We spend quite a bit of time thinking about what the impact would be for a given initiative. We've shelved a number of initiatives that we started and said, you know what, this doesn't make any sense. And that ability to get to an answer quickly, if you remember from earlier, I talked about our 7-year journey to understand price. I don't have 7 years to figure out stickers, right? I don't have 7 years to figure out pricing of given, hot versus cold. I just don't have the time. So this platform really accelerates our speed to insight. And that, I think, has been the biggest differentiator, and the thing that has been the most powerful for our business more than anything else is speed. Is having a platform that and a system that guides us in science and in results really allows us to quickly test and iterate and determine whether or not a concept worked or if it needs to be tweaked. So that we're not failing in a big way, we'll fail in a very small way, in a very contained way, tweak the experiment, and then continue on. One of the things I do want to mention is much of the data that we pull from our machines, much of the data that we pull externally, we literally get it by hook or by crook. So in some cases, we've got to work with the manufacturers to pull data off of our machines. We have to work with the payment system vendors who actually glean the data because it's traversing their network, so we've got to pull it down from them. We have to work with these outside data providers to correlate their data with ours. And so it's no longer aggregating all the data in-house and then working with a data jock to kind of munge the data together. That old method just doesn't work. What we have to do is aggregate data and then be very agile about how we work with that data. But this partnership with our external parties is crucial for us because we can't get some of this information, some of this insight, without working with our partners, be it the manufacturer, be it the customer in some cases, or the payment systems processors. But these are some of the things that we look at. The service calls, we obviously want a better experience. We want to look at usage, so how often the machines are used. We want to make sure the machines are utilized properly. So what we're finding is there's certain days of the week and times of the day that they're not utilized properly. And so those become really good opportunities for us for overly utilized locations or underutilized locations to think about how we incentivize different behaviors. So this is the most exciting initiative we're working on. I've been with the company about 3.5 years, and this is by far the most exciting thing I've seen in the time that I've been there, because we really stumbled upon this, and I think every other industry got disrupted by the smartphone, and finally, the world got around to laundry about 90 days ago. So yay us, right? We finally got disrupted by smartphones in a very good way. And so if you remember that slide that has all of that kind of hulky equipment that it took to take electronic payments, that has completely been revolutionized by something that's about the size of a thumb drive. Something about the size of a USB thumb drive can be installed into a machine, and that enables us or our residents to start and stop a machine using their smartphone. And what's exciting about this is this allows us to glean telemetry off of our machines using the smartphone vector. It allows us to understand the usage of the machine, and it also is a win for the resident because it allows them to, they don't have to go looking for quarters. They can just pull out their smartphone and start the machine. Sounds simple, it sounds basic, but to enable it for this utility-like service is transformative for us. And so how we go to market on this and how we take all of those hundreds of thousands of machines that are accepting coins and flip them to smartphone payment will 100% be guided by this experimentation that we're doing. So things like loyalty programs, things like how we price, things like partner programs for consumables, that will all be enabled in software, and we'll actually be finally able to experiment in software. For now, we're in the real world, but as things transition to smartphone-based payment, we will be able to continue using this experimentation platform, but mainly wrapped around this use case. So we still will continue to do some of the things around environment and fill line stickers and those kinds of initiatives, but we will mostly be focused on this opportunity. And we've got a fairly large pilot that we are scaling right now on this, and we're very, very excited about it. We've seen a tremendous benefit to our customers with this technology. So this is our future, is how we think about the payment systems and the experience that we can enable with payment systems. So let's talk a little bit about pros and cons. And so some of you may be looking at it and go, there are no cons, just go, go, go. But if you step back and look at the business, we actually are very efficient. Spent over a decade and many millions of dollars in technology to make our business more efficient. And so we're actually extremely efficient at collecting coins. In fact, I would tell you that it is less expensive for us to take and process coins than it is to pay a processing fee, enable a machine for electronic payment. It's actually cheaper for us to process coins because we've enabled that through technology, ironically. So that's one thing to consider is, will this, in some cases, running these experiments and wiring these things up, what will this do to our customer base? Will it always improve their experience? Will it always improve revenues for us? The other question that we have internally is around privacy. Is that now we have a smartphone app on our residents' phones. We have to take that very, very seriously. So the third thing is around wallets. Do we want to create yet another wallet for our 7 million residents? Because there's already an Android Pay, there's an Apple Pay wallet, now they have a laundry wallet. It's like, really, another one? And so we think about those things, and also we think about future-proofing. So we enable smartphone payment, but that's the next thing, but is that the last thing? Is there something else that will come and disrupt smartphone payment? Don't know. Today, coins work. And so when we add a smartphone-based payment dongle, we ensure that those machines can still accept coins, because this is a utility that we provide to these residents. They still need to wash their clothes. And so if their smartphones are down, or if there's something that doesn't work properly with the technology, they can still fall back to coin. But if you look at the opportunity, it's tremendous, right? We have a fairly large canvas of machines that are just ripe for this disruption. And we're really, really excited about what that looks like, to be able to potentially reduce our expenses, to reduce the capital expenditures that it takes to accept electronic payments, to be able to remotely manage these machines and get better insights on service from having these machines connected. It's a really, really exciting opportunity for us. Now remember, today we still collect data on over 100,000 machines, but we do that in a way that sometimes is time delayed. And so the smartphone-based payment will allow us to do this on a more real-time basis. So we were able to accelerate and work through a lot of the concepts that we just talked about, really without having a majority of these machines connected. We're able to do it in smaller numbers, and the experiment is still effective at those smaller numbers. We invest in those experiments. We wire up a room. We get the telemetry off that room. We execute the A/B test. We don't have to do it for all of our 75,000 locations. We just do it to where we get a statistically significant sample, and we do it for the appropriate segment. So having that segmentation is really crucial for us. I will share just a couple of things here, and for the business guys and gals on the phone, as a technology guy, I'm constantly challenged to think like a business person. So for a half second, I'll ask you to think like a technology person. In order to do experimentation, advanced analytics, and IoT, in order to get the business value from it, your company, your organization really needs to think like a web-scale startup. And that's creating small sprint teams, that's not being afraid of failure, that's being a bit bold. It also means executing agile processes. So by agile, that means doing things in smaller bites and smaller chunks rather than larger chunks. And so remember, containing that failure, if you will, containing that experiment in a way that is still effective, but it doesn't blow it up into a large project. And then you've got to have clean enterprise data. So in order to merge external data sources with your internal data, the presumption here is that your internal data is actually clean and is correlated. And so that's table stakes for executing on an advanced analytics and IoT project. And then obviously you need access to smart data scientists, and encourage you to partner with your local university if you don't have a firm that you like to work with. Universities are extremely eager for use cases around this subject. We found that actually we had more to choose from in terms of resources than we expected. So a lot of fantastic resources that are available to you, but you've got to have them. So these are kind of what we think about is changing the way you think, but also thinking in smaller bites rather than larger initiatives. This is a huge pivot for us. We spent over a decade and millions of dollars becoming an efficient service organization. And after a certain amount of time, it's marginal improvement in the business, right? Once you get to a certain level of scale with efficiencies, there's only so much more you can squeeze out. And so leveraging data and leveraging technology in our laundry rooms and with our customers and our partners is a huge shift for our business. We're now thinking about growth rather than efficiency. We still have to be efficient in what we do. And that's our charter, that's who we are as a company. But this is enabling and unlocking all kinds of growth opportunity for us. And that's really an exciting thing from a technology point of view, to be able to be on the growth side of a P&L, if you will, is having an initiative or several initiatives that drive that. So it has really changed us as a company. It feels almost like a new chapter, if you will, that really started. We started this initiative because it's really helping us unlock business value. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and that you can find opportunities. I am 100% convinced that there is a advanced analytics and IoT opportunity in every single business. We're a service business and we have an IoT opportunity. I am convinced that there's an opportunity in every single business that can be applied to the business, and it's really up to you to determine how to get there. And hopefully this presentation was helpful in doing that. I'll stick around for Q&A at the end if there's any questions. Sam, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, John. Thank you. What a great example of so many aspects of IoT that came out in our larger study. I can already tell from the number of questions coming in that people are really interested in this topic and John in particular, and so I feel like maybe I should just shut up and get out of the way. But I wanted to tie this to kind of what was happening bigger that we found overall in our survey. So this example is great, but it's interesting that many aspects of this example show up in many industries and organizations. WASH isn't alone or an isolated case, so we see similar findings emerge. And one of those findings was around, Stephanie mentioned at the beginning, around data flowing across organizational boundaries. And so if you look at our survey in aggregate, you can see these arrows, directional arrows for where data is coming back and forth between customers and between suppliers. And what I'll point out is that, certainly John mentioned manufacturers, payments, customers, customer partners, but it's not greedy sharing. This isn't sharing like you toddlers share in preschool, where they're happy to share if that means they get to play with someone else's toys, but don't have to share their own. This is real sharing, where in almost every case, the back and forth is almost even, or it's not too far off. So people are not just willing to get data; they're willing to give it as well. Something we found particularly interesting was the competitor aspect. So it's not that big a surprise that people would share with people in their own value chain, the classic bullwhip disintermediation argument. But the competitor part's pretty interesting. So people are really interested in getting more data about what's happened. Some of this may be driven by common customers. Some may be driven by the competitive dynamics, but there's something going on here that people are finding value in sharing, or else they wouldn't be doing it. We're seeing that in many industries, not just laundry. It's happening lots of different places. And we don't have time to go into it in depth, but there's more information about this sharing. Is not just happening; it's happening, and it's associated with people creating value. So that value creation is important. Just sharing alone wouldn't be enough. We asked people, okay, so what do you need to improve to take advantage of all this data? And John hit a lot of them, but you'll notice that the analytics is at the top of the board. Once you got this data, just getting the data isn't enough. You have to actually be able to do something with it. So what's important then is the analytics, the infrastructure that John mentioned, getting access to the analytics-specific talent or the IoT-specific talent, and things like communications and relationships with other groups. These are relatively non-technical things that are much more about communication and relationships. And finally, I have to mention that data security. Actually, we've already had one question come in about data security. Thanks, Tim, for setting me up for that. I find these numbers about data security surprisingly low. I'm not really sure what people are thinking there. I think security is going to be a big deal with IoT, and it's going to be people need to be paying attention to that now ahead of time because it's going to be far too hard to retrofit later. So up to now, we've been talking about value that comes from IoT, but there's also a competitive advantage aspect of that. And this graph is a little bit hard to read, but in the green is what people think right now. So value is only part of the equation for getting competitive advantage. You have to be able to get value, and others have to be able. You have to be able to do it better than others. It has to be somewhat rare, and people can't be able to imitate it or work around it. And at the moment, there's low abilities to imitate or work around the kinds of things that IoT can do, but people aren't quite there with creating value. If you go back and think about what happens in 3 years, we're going to see much more ability to create value, but much less rarity and much more imitation and substitutes. So I think this points in our mind to a win opportunity for people to take advantage of this. So these averages, if your organization can be above this average and get create much more value from IoT, then you can take advantage of the rarity that might be in place there. How do you get that value? Well, I think David's going to go next and tell us a little bit about how to get that value.
Thanks, Sam. So we've made a big deal about the importance of advanced analytics and data sharing as individual factors that contribute to creating value with IoT. But this sort of raises a question about the extent to which you get a boost from having these capabilities combined and their combined contribution to value creation with IoT. And what this graph shows is that these capabilities working together will significantly increase the odds of getting value from IoT projects. Here you can see the relative contributions of strong analytical capabilities, effective management and governance of data, and data sharing with customers, suppliers, and/or competitors. This is clearly a case where a combination of capabilities literally delivers a sum that exceeds the sum of its parts. The 7%, the numbers that are bolded here, 7%, 8%, and 11%, these are the numbers of, in the case of 11%, data sharing just by itself without advanced analytics capabilities or without effective management and governance of data. Similarly with 7%, that adds up to 26%. But together, if you have all of these capabilities combined, it's 38%. And 38% is significantly more than the 26% you get when you add up the 7, 8, and 11. Since we have so many great questions, I'm not going to linger on this slide. So the next one, IoT experience and concern for customer reaction. We found that companies become increasingly concerned about customer reactions to their IoT initiatives as they get started, but with experience, this concern wanes. This graph shows the trajectory of corporate concern for customer reactions to IoT, and not surprisingly, at the beginning, when they have no plans to use IoT, they're not that concerned about customer reaction. But from the time they do start having plans to use IoT to the first year or so after beginning to use IoT, the concern for customer reaction grows, and then it falls off. We thought this was interesting for a couple of reasons. One is the percentages on the whole aren't very high at all, which implies that whatever the level of experience with IoT, there isn't that much concern or apprehension about what customers might think about using connected devices. And in the case of wash, the laundry market, this makes sense. You want to be able to know as the end user when the laundry machines are free, or as a business customer to have the opportunity to participate in pricing experiments. But on the other hand, it's not clear that managers are fully appreciating the full extent of the market for connected devices, the demand in some B2C markets. Who really wants a connected refrigerator that sends information about household milk inventory? Well, full disclosure, I do some days. In business-to-business markets, the appetite for IoT may need to be whetted more than some managers think. I'll have more to say on this in a moment. I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So our advice for managers, as I think you've heard from John, from Sam, from Stephanie, there's a significant benefit comes from having advanced analytic capabilities. And even if you already have advanced analytical capabilities, there's always room to grow from, more in that area. Prepare to share. Sharing data can be an extremely complex process, and it's important not to underestimate how difficult, complex, and thorny this can be. It may be useful in some instances to identify someone responsible for figuring out the thorny issues associated with say, data ownership and data sharing practices, such as when to share some data with whom and under what conditions. We talk about this in more detail in the report. And then prepare the market. Understand your consumers. Some consumers may want smart laundry machines, but they also might not want smart blenders. Demand for IoT devices and services can be uneven. We can say more about this in the Q&A section if people are interested. That's it for me. I think let's get to the questions. Sam?
Yeah, sure. We still have a few minutes here for some questions, and so please submit those if you have them, or if you've not already. Honestly, I'm a bit overwhelmed with the number of questions here, trying to read through them, and not surprisingly, many people have questions for John in particular. So one of the questions that came out that I'm only going to pick questions that I think we actually can answer. There's some of these that seem quite difficult, but John, there's some questions about how you actually go about this organizationally. So you talk about making a web scale startup, and you talked about how you get this to happen. How did actually you get that culture to change within your organization, and what effect did that have on various constituencies, influence, and power? I've kind of combined a few questions there, people. Sorry.
Well, that's a great one. I don't want to sound cliche. It actually is a top-down and bottom-up cultural shift. I'm fortunate to be in an organization that has a very engaged shareholder, a very industrial-oriented shareholder, and so it started for us with just socializing with our investors in the opportunity, and that created a groundswell, if you will, for interest in doing this. It obviously created some budget. Somebody once told me that vision without budget is hallucination, so I love that. And this is an example of one of those things that you do have to create some budget around it, because you have to resource it. Right? We talked about all the things that you needed to do. Accessing some of this external data and buying resources, they're expensive. So it has to be resourced. So I think it has to start with a culture at the top of an awareness of an opportunity. So that's one. And then the second thing is you need resources inside the organization who already have day jobs, and we all kind of know who those people are in our respective organizations, but that can help guide this in a way that is not just a mad scientist kind of experiment. And so it is, in my opinion, I think I'm fortunate enough that I have, a board and a management team that is willing to think this way. And so my encouragement to some managers that are out there is to work with your board to socialize this with them, rather than working on a science project and then kind of getting busted later for why the hell did you do that? You're off the script. I think it has to be guided by a senior leadership team and a board of directors that is really interested in exploring this opportunity. So that's, I think, the organizational thing that really helps clear a lot of the roadblocks and static that typically happen when these things sort of surface organically. I think there are some examples where this can surface organically, that kind of a SWAT team within the organization can start doing it, but it's just very risky because these are kind of stealth-ish projects that quickly get shut down with other priorities. So it has to get prioritized, it has to get some kind of resourcing, and then once that takes shape, I think it will develop more organically, much more healthily than if it were just done sort of from the bottom up.
Yeah, thanks. So there's an element of starting small, and actually, if you look at John's numbers, I mean, relatively speaking, most of their machines are still not connected. It seems like, in our overall survey and interview process with other organizations, starting small seems to be a common theme. I think we had a good example of that. Stephanie, didn't we have an example where people were starting small?
Right. So, one important thing to keep in mind is that this is the Internet of Things, and sometimes those things are widely dispersed and in, not hospitable environments. And so one of those examples was the Array of Things project in Chicago. It's a smart city project where sensors are installed on telephone poles, and then they gather data that's used to help answer questions that will improve the urban environment. But those they made a point of rolling out that project very slowly because Chicago is not known for its balmy winter weather, and those sensors that are mounted outside need to be able to withstand some pretty serious external conditions. And so they made a point of rolling it out very slowly in order to be able to test those sensors, their weatherproofness, how reliable they are, before they launched a larger project.
Yeah, so that kind of ties into...
Sorry, Sam, I was just going to share from a budget, just to put a number on it. We started with a budget of $250,000. So when we first started this, we said, can I have $250,000 to just do this? And here's kind of what the priority looks like. And let's see how it goes for a couple of months and see what we discover. And that obviously grew from there. So it doesn't take, I think, in context, a tremendous amount of investment to pull something together, especially if it's small.
So actually, one of the questions came in. Actually, we've got a lot of questions specifically about how you organize and how you were set up for this, and data format specifications. So there's a lot of how frequently data comes along. But a lot of the questions are around your experimentation platform, John. So how is that organizationally supported? Where does that live? How did it get started? How did you get? It seemed like to get all that data together requires a pretty significant investment that may be more than you were just talking about. How did that get off the ground, and where does it live?
Okay, so that's a great question. It lives today in IT. I hope one day it can graduate out of IT and be released properly into other aspects of the business. So today it is being cultivated and incubated within the four walls of IT. Reason for that is each of the dashboards on the experimentation platform are kind of custom made. And I say that because an experiment has different features that you're going to be looking for. So in the fill line sticker example, we're looking at service calls. But other experiments like experimental pricing, you may be looking at time of day, day of week. So the dimensionality in what you look at on a dashboard is going to change based on the experiment. So it does involve some technical engagement. Thankfully, this is on the back of an existing data warehouse. So it's sort of like I've already got something that's baked, and now I've just got something else, and I'm putting it with that. And so it's not like we're starting from raw transactional data and then going to 11. It's more like we have an enterprise data warehouse. Now we need to put unstructured data with that data warehouse. And thankfully, there's a lot of cloud-based tools that are available that allow you to do that in a very accelerated way. And so I grew up as a database guy, right? And so I've always been about rows and columns. But the new technologies that are, forgive kind of some of the technical jargon, they're NoSQL. So they're a bit less structured. They allow for more play in how data is formatted. It doesn't need a rigid data structure and a rigid kind of rows and columns organization in order for you to get insights. You can actually do this stuff in real time. So you can take the data as it is, however it looks, however ugly and nasty the data is coming in, and you can pair that with data that is beautiful and clean that comes out of the enterprise and glean insights. And so I don't know if that answers that question directly, but if you think about this like a traditional enterprise data warehouse project, it will never get off the ground. In a very agile way, in that data comes in and it's essentially at the point of analysis is actually where the merge actually happens. So it's a much more real-time kind of a just-in-time look at how data is put together.
Okay, so lots of times I try to read the questions and then summarize them or synthesize them, but there's one that I think is really at the heart of this. We've talked about the business value that comes from this, but someone has directly asked, so does the rollout of this stuff mean the final nail in the coffin for privacy? And John, I know you're paying attention a lot to what people are doing. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're doing to preserve privacy for people who are being monitored effectively. It's not just the machines that are being monitored.
Right. So what we do, everything we do is anonymized. But I will say just a general comment. Gmail, Facebook, a lot of these tools that everyone uses, it's incredible how much privacy we as a society are willing to trade off for functionality. And so there is an inevitable trade-off that takes place in order to get what we're looking for. What we do as a business is we ensure that the data is anonymized so that we don't trace it back to a given individual. We make sure that to the extent that there is any PII, that it is scrubbed before it hits the experimentation platform. And so we follow best practices for privacy. We maintain PCI compliance. We do external scans every quarter. So we follow best practices when it comes to privacy. But just as a general statement, there are some things that we will just not be able to do without having more information, more granular information about the activities in these rooms. We don't plan on putting cameras in laundry rooms, right? We don't plan on doing things like that that are overly invasive. But we do want to know when these machines are being used, and we would like to know what the habits are of the people that are using them, so that we can optimize that experience to them. Kind of nothing more. So, but there is a trade-off. There's no question about it. It is a question. The question is always there, and we always respect the sensitivity to that.
So there's some questions here about I think we probably have time for one more about the value of data. So, you mentioned a relatively small starting point, John, but how much, you've got a short-term, hey, we might get an ROI of X, Y, or Z from these concrete things, but how do you go about valuing some of these abstract, well, if we build this, maybe we can do something in the future? We've seen that in other organizations where they build a Wi-Fi connectivity, and then suddenly they find a lot more applications for that. But how do you ROI the first one and then weight it with the second part, the vaguer part?
I like to say that there's an art and a science to technology, and we've just taken the opportunity that we had and capitalized on it as best we could, both with people and with process. But there is absolutely a level of over-engineering that you can put into a solution that allows you for future capability. The difficulty is if you overthink it, you're never going to get anything done. But I'll give you a great example that a partner recently had that I think helped illustrate the point. We talked recently with a card systems vendor. So this is, again, somebody who's in this space who makes the hardware for these machines. And we're talking about how do we enable Bluetooth payment on that system. And we're like looking at the legacy stuff to go, let's take the legacy stuff and let's make that, enabled for Bluetooth payment. And the engineer was there, and the engineer goes, you know what? We actually have a port on there that we put on there for a daughter card that we never used. And it was actually intended for an Ethernet port. I think we can actually tap into that and put Bluetooth on that so that we can enable smartphone payment. And so that's a great example of a vendor who had forward thinking in creating modularity in their solution so that they could expand it later. It's a balance between creating these new capabilities and enabling future capabilities you haven't even thought of, and actually just getting the stupid thing done. And that's kind of difficult to balance.
Okay, I think we're out of time here, though. So and this is great stuff. Steve, I think you have some parting words here.
Yes, excellent presentation and discussion, everybody. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have. Just want to let the audience know that over the next few days, look out for a feedback survey that we'll be sending out via email. Also, we'll send you an email so you can see the recording and a copy of the slides. We greatly appreciate all of your thoughts and opinions for this survey. And we want to conclude this part of our presentation. Thank you again to our speakers, John Bucola of Washington Multifamily Laundry Systems, Stephanie Jernigan of Boston College, Sam Ransbotham, also of Boston College, and David Chiron of MIT Sloan Management Review. And of course, we want to have thanks to our sponsor, Teradata. A reminder again that the recording of this presentation and slides will be available within the next 3 to 4 business days. Thanks again for attending our program, and have a great day.